welcome to. Okay, I guess welcome now to the office hours, 9th of May. We have a couple of items on the agenda today, so no new participants. So I guess we'll just like go straight to the agenda items. T- you go first.
All right. I had a bit of audio trouble, but I guess I'm up. All right. So first item today is something that we've been working on under the hood over the past few weeks. It even caused some friction in some corner cases 2 releases ago, and we fixed those in the last release, mostly concerning the developer container. So if you use that one, the latest release should have fixed things for you. What we did is what we call the big scripts merge. Now there's a bit of a backstory to that. Let me share my screen. And that was more or less the whole team was involved in that, making things work. So we had three core repositories where, let's call it Flatcar, OS, and SDK stuff was maintained. First, there was scripts. Then there's Portage Stable, and then there is Chorus Overlay. The name is for legacy reasons. In the script repo, we have our build automation. We have stuff for the SDK container. It's in the Flatcar org at /scripts. Portage Stable has Gentoo ebuild imports. So Portage Stable is pretty much a carbon copy of the Gentoo packages that we use in Flatcar. Repo is available at Flatcar-Portage Stable, and Chorus Overlay has all of the specific Flatcar centered e-builds that are not from Gentoo, but are fully maintained by ourselves. Those are some core Flatcar tools that we need to work, in order for Flatcar to work, and that are important components like systemd and the kernel, which we're not using from Gentoo, but instead we're using these straight upstream releases. Now, those are integrated with the scripts repo as Git submodules. This has the benefit that any given checkout of the scripts repo has pinned references of those submodules, so you have version in order. One way we're using that is for every release, you would create a tag in the scripts repo, and that tag would reference exactly the state of the submodules as they were present when we cut the release, and that way make the release nice and reproducible. Now, the mounting challenges that we are beginning to meet with this setup is, if you have a PR that concerns packages in Portage Stable, and you have a different PR that concerns packages in Chorus Overlay, then both of these PRs would make assumptions of both the state of scripts and the state of the respective other ebuild repository, and that was okay in some of the cases, and that led to crashes in other cases. So one thing we pondered is whether we should just not make assumptions at all, but instead make these PRs go to the scripts repo and create respective refs into Portage Stable and Chorus Overlay. So we are basically back at the reproducible point where one checkout in scripts can make a reproducible build of all of the PRs. And as you see here, that creates a little bit of stir and a lot of overhead for PRs that we didn't really want. Also, it was kind of blocking automation of PR testing that we were working on at the same time. So what we did is we just took scripts and moved all of the contents of Portage Stable and Chorus Overlay right into scripts, and that includes all of the history. So we changed the history of the commits to meet a subdirectory in the scripts repo. We have all of the history of Portage Stable and Chorus Overlay for all of the components within the scripts repo now. That was the big merge. And it now resides at also kind of a legacy path. We are pondering the idea to move that further up into the scripts repo, so it's easier to find. Right now, it resides within the directory SDK container source third party. And there are two directories, Portage Stable and Chorus Overlay. Now, what that enables us to do is now you fire PRs directly to the scripts repo. Scripts has become kind of a legacy name as well. Like this repo should be called Flatcar distro or something like that, because it contains all things Flatcar. It has build automation, SDK container, and all of the ebuilds. So if you file a PR that would add, remove, or update packages, basically change the operating system image or the SDK, that would go straight to the scripts repo. And we're leveraging that in automation already, because those PRs for the operating system image already, and in the future for the SDK as well, are being fully tested, built from sources, and the full test suite is run on these PRs. That test suite is executed on the QEMU provider, and that way we can have pretty thorough and fast automatic verifications of the PRs. And that's about it.
Great, thanks, Tilo. So KubeCon was recently, and Jeremy was giving a talk. So maybe you can give a debrief of your talk and your experience in KubeCon.
Sure, Danielle. So as Danielle mentioned, I gave a talk at KubeCon. I'm a Flatcar maintainer, but I also contribute to the Kata containers projects and the confidential containers projects. So I spoke about confidential containers, and this is also something that has come up, intersects with Flatcar slightly, because the goal of the confidential containers projects or Kata containers projects are to run VMs or containers within VMs in Kubernetes clusters or in Containerd. And so, as you may have heard, right, like Flatcar is trying to get into the CNCF, or we have contributed or started on the process of contributing Flatcar to CNCF. And so when we presented this at Tag Runtime, which is the I guess technical advisory group, is that the correct expansion? Yeah. So Tag Runtime is the one that deals with everything to do with like container runtimes and ways of running containers, right? So it has a very broad scope. And one of the things that came up was whether we could work on integrating Kata better with Flatcar, right? Like what would the ideal be? Because right now Kata ships a whole bunch of OS packages and also static binaries, right, that are installed on every node through a daemon set. So we'll be looking into how this could work for Flatcar. This intersects with some of the work we've been doing on systems extensions, systemd sysx, right? Like this is one possible format for delivering like the payload, which consists of like hypervisor kernel initrd that can be used for spinning up VMs with Kata. So at KubeCon, we again met with the Tag Runtime to present or talk about the progress that we've made towards being accepted into the CNCF. So I attended the Tag Runtime for that purpose, but we also had a lot of different interesting discussions with different users. Topics that came up were things like how should one manage certificates in a Kubernetes cluster, because modern infrastructure requires TLS everywhere and mutual authentication, but there's like no defined standards of where, like how to inject a certificate from the cluster into a container so that it's picked up correctly. Depends on languages as well. So that was an interesting discussion. There were also discussions around how to do batch scheduling better, how to do functions as a service better, right? Like things like Lambda or Azure Functions, where you basically spin up a container per request or per bunch of requests, and you want to deal well with things like the latency of starting up a container when a request comes in. You want to ideally minimize that. Perhaps you want to pre-provision a container, right? And keep it like in a snapshotted state, ready to process the request, or just have a pool or whatever, right? Then we also discussed things like evolutions in the Kubernetes ecosystem around devices. How should one, how should the, call it, device provider prepare, assets in a way that a Kubernetes cluster can then absorb, like not absorb, but parse or interact with, and then expose as resources to the workloads, so that things like GPUs or accelerators or FPGAs are easy to consume. So there's evolutions in that direction. We met some people doing some pretty cool things with Flatcar. So we have a lot of new adopters in our adopters file that entered from discussions at KubeCon. Also, some people who are running like multi-thousand node setups with multiple clusters on Flatcar and running batch jobs on those. So that's a class of user that we had no idea existed, but we came across them also at the tag runtime. Yeah, the thing with the adopters, right? Like basically, we would go walk at KubeCon, try to talk to people about what they're doing with Kubernetes, right? And then start asking people, hey, like, what do you run underneath? What's your configuration, right? Because everyone always tells you about what their end value to the users is, right? Like, what's their platform? What do they sell, or what do they build on top? But for a distribution like Flatcar, it's interesting to find out what is happening underneath, right? Like, what stack are you using? What Linux distribution? What container runtime? What storage system, or what network CNI for Kubernetes, right? Like, what Kubernetes distribution, right? These are data points that inform our decisions as a distribution of which configurations get the most widest support or usage, which tooling requires some improvements, right? Things like Falco, others. Like, out of these discussions, we get valuable insights into our users. And so walking around asking people what do they run, you hear a lot of people run Ubuntu, right? But you also find a lot of people that use Flatcar and are very happy, and don't talk about it because they're so happy, right? The only people that complain about something are the people that talk about something are the people that complain. Perhaps that's an overstatement, but we do appreciate hearing from everyone who uses Flatcar. Yeah, and we also heard from people who use Cluster API, and we've talked in these community calls about our engagement with Cluster API and our work to make it work well with Flatcar. So like, Flatcar is probably the second best supported distribution in Cluster API at this time. And I mean, recently we added support for OpenStack. So there was a talk at a pre-conference to KubeCon, Cloud Native Rejects, where a user was sharing his experience using Cluster API with OpenStack and with Flatcar, and with Cluster API you have to build your own distro images, and the way people do this is through a project called Image Builder, and this is something where Flatcar is well supported, and yeah, and we hear that from users as well, that they have significantly less trouble, because we make gradual changes, we don't make big changes all at once, right? So that's what happened at KubeCon regarding Flatcar and related topics. Thanks, Danielle.
Thanks. So I was also at KubeCon, and I really share the same notion. And funnily enough, like, oh, by the way, I wanted to say that like, we apply to incubation, not to sandbox. So just saying. And funnily enough, while I was at KubeCon, I got a phone call from my neighbors that there's issue with the pipes that are coming from their bathroom, which is like above my bathroom. So there was a leakage while I was like in KubeCon in another country, which was like suboptimal. So like it made me think about the what you said about like users of Flatcar, that they don't hear anything. Like it's like plumbing, you don't hear anything about it, you don't think about it until something happens. So, but like it would be good if people could talk about it and add their use case to the adopter file. It would be nice to hear also about the good bits. Cool. I guess it's back to you, Tilo, to talk about what we're planning to do with the release planning.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess the only call that you could have gotten that would be worse than your neighbor above you phoning in for leakage would be the neighbor below you phoning you for leakage. But that's maybe just me. Sharing my screen again, because I find this quite useful in just capturing my own thoughts. All right. So yeah, I'm seconding here for Sayan, who couldn't make it today. Most of this plan is his initiative, and even though it's my writing, I'm basically presenting his ideas here. So this is not about today. Today is the community call, and we present Flatcar news. We have the occasional demos. We have sometimes guests presenting things. And at the bottom of this call is a quick look into releases. This is kind of how release planning started, happening every second Tuesday. But we noticed a long time ago that our release cadence was higher than our call cadence. So we came up with a second release planning call, and that is usually 2 weeks after the community call, so on every fourth Tuesday of the month. And it only basically consists of the lower part of the release planning. And we always felt something's missing. And if you're like a team, you're working very close together, then you sometimes don't notice like the big obvious things that you're not communicating. And we did notice after some reflection. So we're going to extend the release planning call, not the release planning part of this meeting. And we'll add a roadmap review. All of these things are public, and you can look them up with our project boards. But I think it's worth going through them at least once a month. So we're looking at the roadmap, and then we have specific projects, like focus projects that happen within the Flatcar maintainer community that we want to look at. And we'll also do some backlog grooming. So basically the team coming together and sharing their plans and their successes. In particular, the roadmap review. So if you go to the Flatcar project board, right in the Flatcar org in GitHub, you'll find a roadmap tab, and below that tab you find like the huge issues. There's almost never any sudden movement on that board. We move one of those items probably every few months. So this is giving you like a wide lookout on what's happening in Flatcar in the future, and this is open for community for being community driven as well. So if you would reason a good roadmap direction for us to take, then that would be the board where that particular issue would end up. Then there's the projects review, and that's kind of taken from the roadmap. So we have like specific focus areas that we're actively working on. The two currently active focus areas are SysExt and Cluster API. Cluster API has progressed a lot further than SysExt because SysExt was only recently started. So Cluster API handles all of the Cluster API specific issues and features that Flatcar has. And SysExt looks into systemd SysExt as addition to Flatcar to enable composable images to make the Flatcar OS image more versatile and better extendable without dealing with the core base image itself. And backlog is basically the implementation tab. That's our day-to-day work. So we're at a little bit of review and backlog grooming to the release planning, just because this is what's making up every single release, right? So instead of just presenting what we're going to publish, this will enable folks to understand what is going on and what will be published during the next weeks and months. So that's the changes we're planning. The next release planning, the revamped version, is on the 23rd of May at 3:30 p.m. GMT. It would be awesome if we could see you there.
So I think if you would not have been an engineer, you could have been a physician, because your handwriting is distinct.
Thanks. I know there was a need for me to just read all of this, but yeah.
Just kidding. No, it was great. So we talked about the release planning and the revamp of that. So let's get at it, and Dongzu, take that when Sean is out.
Okay, you want me to share my screen? Just. Okay, can you see it?
Yeah.
Yes. This is just usual our release planning board, which is also public. You can also always see that in our GitHub project board. And 2 weeks ago, April 24th, we released the new versions in all channels, alpha, beta, stable, and LTS. And now the original plan was to start building releases in this week. So alpha, beta, and stable. That most of things are already done. So the main focus of these changes mainly in alpha is to address security issues in the last several weeks. For example, the OpenSSH and CRS and Go, OpenSSL, and so on. And yeah, these are all already done, merged, and yeah, all okay. CI failure was not seen. The remaining things are, however, for example, the bash. So bash has a security issue. So Krishna tries to update it, however, it has some issues in CI tests. And yeah, for example, the locksmith bug fix is still not merged. So Kai was creating the PR, and yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, everything is done. Then yeah, probably in several days we will be able to start building releases. And yeah, that's it from my side.
Okay, so that was actually the last item on our agenda. I guess that concludes the meeting, and see you next month for the next one, next office hours, and 2 weeks if you want to get like to the all the details about the next release. Ciao.
Bye, folks.
Ciao.
Bye.